A happy New Year's Eve, if there's such a thing in the year of 2025. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to a better 2026 than we had in 2025. It was one long, bloody war. And boy, do I mean bloody. And it's coming to an end amidst new war being waged in Venezuela. The aerial war will soon be succeeded by boots on the ground in Venezuela if Donald Trump's rhetoric is anything to go by. It's not going to end any better than all the other wars that we've been involved in. General Smedley Butler famously said, "War is a racket," and racket indeed it is, and it's perfectly circular. The people who make the most money off the wars give some of that as a kickback to the politicians who proselytize and manufacture consent for the very wars which are enriching the merchants of death. A perfect example in the last 12 months was provided by Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson inexplicably turned up in Kiev and scuppered the peace plan which had been initialed in Istanbul in the first few weeks of the war in the Ukraine. All of those dead people could still have been alive. All of that destruction, death and bloodshed could have been avoided. But Boris Johnson, inexplicably at the time, travelled to Kiev and convinced Zelensky that Britain and the countries of the coalition of the killing, the so-called Western countries, even though most of their populations are entirely against the policies of their government, they would back Zelensky if he carried on fighting. So the initialed copies of the peace agreement at Istanbul were quietly shelved. And well over 1 million people, getting on for 2 million people, would still be alive today if he had not done that. So why did he do that? Well, we later learned in the course of 2025 that not only one of the main merchants of death in the Ukraine war gave Boris Johnson £1 million sterling, but that Boris Johnson took him on what was effectively a sales trip to Kiev so that he would get even more business in the war. And of course, as in everything, what happens in Britain on that scale happens in the United States on a far greater scale. It is undeniably true that the American political system is bought and paid for by special interests, and those special interests are often, perhaps mostly, to be found in the military-industrial complex, against which General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied commander in World War II, warned us on his last day, his valedictory address on leaving office as President of the United States well over half a century ago. President Eisenhower was right. The overweening special interests in Washington and increasingly in London, and no doubt in Paris and Berlin too, are a particular, special, clear and present danger to the safety of the people and to the future of the world. It was a year which came to an end with the blood-curdling threats of Donald Trump towards Venezuela. The Donald Rumsfeld, the George W. Bush Defense Secretary, famously said in the highly lampoonable address that he gave when he said, "It's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries." Donald Trump went one better. He didn't even recognize that it was under other people's countries. He thinks that God, which God, who knows, gave America the right to take the land and the oil of people in other countries, and that they are not other people's countries. They belong to the United States at the whim and at the caprice of a here today, gone tomorrow President of the United States of America. We don't know how the Venezuelan situation will develop, but it bookends the disasters that occurred earlier in the year. We talked about some of them last week, particularly the incredible, almost George Lucas Star Wars type affair that was the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, begun by Israel and its sneak attack on Tehran and its denizens. But the war between Israel and Iran isn't over yet. It was only a round in the conflict which seems certain to be reignited in the course of 2026. It was an annus horribilis for millions, scores of millions, maybe hundreds of millions throughout the world. It was almost the end. It was almost Armageddon. And of course, it didn't end well for me and Gayatri either, when we were stopped by no less than 10 armed police officers of the anti-terrorism squad. I'm not making this up. This really happened at a London airport. Something happened to me. Maybe it broke my heart. It certainly gave me arrhythmia. I never had a day's illness, never missed work for one day in my entire life from the age of 14. But I now have a cardiologist. Amazing. The words, "I have a cardiologist," were words I never thought that I would utter. I'm taking 10 tablets a day. I have to be very careful what I do, because any word spoken in anger might well be my last. But hey, what a way to go, speaking the truth to power. It ended with Gayatri and me in exile. It ended with Gayatri and me separated from our children, a situation, I'm glad to say, which has now been reversed. And we and our family will go on talking. If anyone's listening, stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.